My stepmother threw away photo albums of my dead mother because it was unhealthy and creepy. So, I made her lose everything. My mom died when I was 9. Before she got sick, she made these photo albums for me. One for every year of my life, plus special ones for holidays and vacations. She wrote notes on every picture explaining what we were doing, what I'd said that day, little inside jokes we had. She spent her last good months making sure I'd have these memories. Dad kept them in my room on a special bookshelf Mom had painted with butterflies and my name. I'd look at them every night before bed. Dad met Linda when I was 13. She seemed nice enough at first. She'd ask about Mom's photos when she came over, said it was beautiful how Mom left me such thoughtful gifts. She'd even sit with me sometimes while I showed her pictures from family trips. Dad was happy someone finally understood how important they were to me. They got married when I was 14. Linda moved in and immediately started changing everything. Mom's dishes had to go because they didn't match her aesthetic. Mom's garden got ripped out for Linda's modern landscaping, but she never touched my room or my photos. Dad made sure she knew those were off limits. When I turned 15, Linda signed me up for this 3-week summer camp without asking me. She said it would be good for me to make new friends and get out of the house. Dad thought it sounded healthy. I didn't want to go, but they'd already paid the non-refundable deposit. Before I left, I had this bad feeling. I asked Dad to promise my room would stay exactly the same. He promised. Linda stood right there and promised too. She even helped me pack and said she'd water the plant Mom had given me. I came back to an entirely different room. New furniture, new paint, new bedding. Everything redesigned in Linda's favorite colors. The butterfly bookshelf was gone. The photos were gone. All 17 albums plus the box of loose pictures waiting to be organized. Gone. I asked Linda where my photos were. She said she'd donated them along with the old furniture because I needed to stop living in the past. She actually said keeping photos of a dead person was unhealthy and creepy. Dad wasn't even home yet from picking me up when I started screaming. Linda told me to stop being hysterical over some old pictures. I called Dad sobbing. He rushed home from dropping my camp stuff at the laundromat. When he saw my room, he asked Linda what happened. She said she'd surprised me with a room makeover and I was being ungrateful. Dad asked about the photos. Linda said they were gone and I needed to move forward with my life. Dad went silent. He asked which donation center. Linda said she couldn't remember. He asked for a receipt. She said she didn't keep it. He asked how she could do this. She said she was helping me heal and he should support his wife's parenting decisions. That's when I knew she was lying about donating them. She was too calm, too prepared with answers. I waited until they went to bed and searched the house. Found nothing. Checked the garage, the attic, the basement. Nothing. Then I remembered Linda had been complaining about the storage unit being too expensive. Dad had one for his tools and seasonal decorations. I took Linda's keys and drove there at 2 in the morning. The unit had been cleaned out except for Dad's stuff, but the dumpster outside had bags of trash. I dug through every single one. At the bottom, I found 3 of Mom's albums. Water damaged, covered in garbage juice, pages stuck together. Only 3 out of 17. The rest were gone forever. I brought them home and showed Dad. He lost it. Asked Linda again what she'd done. She admitted she'd thrown them away because she was tired of competing with a ghost. Said I'd never accept her as my mother with those photos around. Dad told her to get out. She laughed and said he couldn't kick her out of her own home. That's when the revenge started. First, I found out Linda had been married before. She never mentioned it, but I did some digging and found her ex-husband, Robert. Called him pretending to be doing a school project about marriage and divorce. Robert was very chatty. Told me all about how Linda had sold his deceased mother's jewelry while he was on a business trip. Said she claimed it was cluttering the house. Sound familiar? I gave Dad Robert's number. They had a long conversation. Then I started documenting everything Linda did. Down in my notebook, I started writing down every single time Linda criticized Mom, every comment about how I needed to move on, every lie she told Dad about why she was getting rid of Mom's things. I wrote down dates and what exactly happened, keeping everything in a folder hidden in my backpack where Linda couldn't find it. Dolores helped me organize it all into a timeline with specific dates and witnesses, treating my notes like real evidence instead of just a kid complaining about his stepmom. She showed me how to write down who else was there when things happened, what time of day it was, anything that could prove I wasn't making stuff up. Dolores contacted Robert, and he was super willing to talk about Linda's past, saying he'd been waiting years for someone to hold her accountable for what she did to his mom's jewelry. He still had the police report from when he tried to get the jewelry back, plus photos of the pieces and receipts showing what they were worth, and he told Dolores he'd testify in court if Dad needed him to. Dolores put together this whole file showing that Linda had a pattern of destroying dead people's belongings, that this wasn't just some mistake with my albums, but something she'd done before to Robert's family. At the school the next week, my math teacher noticed I kept staring at my desk instead of doing the work, and sent me to see Sebastian Larson, the guidance counselor. I didn't want to talk about it at first because I figured he'd just give me some speech about coping with divorce, but he asked specific questions about why I was having trouble focusing. I ended up telling him everything about the albums, about finding them in the dumpster, about how Linda threw away 14 years of mom's memories like they were trash. Sebastian took notes the whole time and said he needed to document this officially because it was affecting my schoolwork and mental health. He wrote up this report about our conversation, noting how I couldn't concentrate in class and kept thinking about the lost albums, and he said this kind of documentation could help Dad's lawyer prove emotional distress if they needed it for court. Daryl was really happy when Dad showed him Sebastian's report, saying it proved Linda's actions had caused me real harm that affected my daily life. 2 weeks after Linda moved out to stay with her sister, Dad got served with papers at work. Linda had filed a response to the divorce claiming Dad was manipulated by his troubled teenage son, who couldn't accept his father's remarriage. Her filing said she'd only been trying to help me move past unhealthy grief patterns, and Dad should support her parenting decisions instead of letting me control the household. Daryl brought the papers over that evening, and I read through Linda's version of events, feeling sick to my stomach as she twisted everything into this story where she was the victim trying to help a difficult stepson. She claimed the albums were taking up too much space and I was obsessing over them in an unhealthy way, that she'd suggested donating them and I'd agreed, but then changed my mind and blamed her. Daryl could see I was upset and reminded us that Linda's story didn't match the security footage showing her sneaking to the storage unit while I was at camp. He said judges see through these kinds of lies when there's actual evidence, and we had the footage plus Robert's testimony about her doing the exact same thing to his family. A few days later, Dolores called Dad saying she'd tracked down someone else who knew about Linda's past behavior. Roberta Parrish had worked with Linda 3 years ago and agreed to meet us at a coffee shop downtown, though Dolores warned us she seemed nervous about getting involved. We met Roberta on a Saturday morning, and she looked uncomfortable the whole time, stirring her coffee and not making eye contact at first. She finally explained that Linda had been fired from their marketing company after she threw away a co-worker's family photos that were displayed on her desk in a frame. Linda had told their boss the photos made the workspace look unprofessional and cluttered, so she'd tossed them in the trash during a weekend when no one else was there. The co-worker had been devastated because the photos included pictures of her deceased grandmother, and she'd threatened to sue the company. Roberta said the company had settled quietly and fired Linda to avoid further legal trouble, paying the co-worker several $1,000s for the destroyed photos. Dad asked why Linda would do something like that, and Roberta said Linda always seemed bothered by other people's family photos, especially ones of people who had passed away, like she couldn't stand seeing other people hold on to their memories. After Roberta left, Dad just sat there staring at his coffee cup, processing what we'd just learned. Daryl added Roberta's testimony to our file alongside Robert's statement and the security footage, pointing out that we now had 3 separate incidents of Linda destroying other people's meaningful possessions. The pattern was clear and documented, showing this wasn't some one-time mistake or moment of frustration, but something Linda did repeatedly when she felt threatened by other people's connections to their deceased loved ones. Dad couldn't believe Linda had been fired from her previous job and lied about why she left, telling him she'd quit because she wanted a change when really she'd been pushed out for destroying someone's property. I felt this weird mix of anger and relief, angry that Linda had fooled Dad for so long, but relieved that my gut feeling about her being deliberately cruel was right all along. 3 weeks after Linda filed her response, her lawyer contacted Daryl requesting mediation to try settling things without going to court. Daryl explained that mediation meant sitting down with Linda and her lawyer to see if we could reach an agreement, and he advised us to go because judges like seeing people try to work things out reasonably before taking up court time. Dad wasn't sure he could sit in a room with Linda after everything she'd done, but Daryl said refusing mediation might make us look unreasonable to a judge later. The mediation session was scheduled for the following Thursday at a neutral office downtown, and I spent the whole week dreading having to see Linda again. When we got there, Linda was already sitting at the conference table with her lawyer, and she started crying the second she saw Dad. She kept saying she'd made a terrible mistake in a moment of frustration, that she loved me, and just wanted to help me heal from losing my mom. The mediator let her talk for a while, then asked her a simple question about why she'd thrown away 14 albums if it was just a momentary mistake. Linda couldn't answer convincingly, stuttering something about how she'd started with one and then just kept going, which made no sense, and everyone in the room could tell she was lying. During a break, Linda's lawyer pulled Daryl aside and they talked quietly in the hallway, while Dad and I sat in the conference room trying not to look at Linda. When Daryl came back, he said Linda's lawyer had suggested a settlement offer where Linda would pay for professional photo restoration for the 3 damaged albums we'd recovered and compensate us financially for the ones that were lost forever. Dad and I stepped outside to talk it over privately, and I told him that money couldn't replace Mom's handwriting and her notes about my childhood, but maybe professional restoration could save what little we'd managed to recover from the dumpster. Dad agreed the settlement sounded reasonable if it included enough money to show Linda was taking responsibility, so we told Daryl we'd consider it as part of a larger agreement that covered everything else in the divorce. The mediation session lasted 4 more hours as the lawyers went back and forth on specific numbers and terms. Linda agreed to pay $15,000 for the destroyed albums, which Daryl said was fair compensation based on the time Mom spent making them and their irreplaceable nature. She also agreed to cover all costs for professional restoration of the 3 damaged albums, move out of the house permanently within 30 days, and sign away any claim to the house or Dad's retirement accounts. In exchange, Dad agreed not to pursue criminal charges for destruction of property, though Daryl made sure the settlement included a clause where Linda had to admit in writing that she'd thrown away the albums intentionally and not by accident. Linda's lawyer tried to fight that part, but eventually gave in when Daryl threatened to bring Roberta and Robert to testify in court about Linda's pattern of behavior. By the time we left the mediation office, I felt exhausted but relieved that it was finally over, and Linda would be out of our lives for good. The next day, after the settlement was officially signed, I felt this weird, empty feeling like something important was finished, but also like nothing would ever be right again. $15,000 couldn't bring back the 14 albums that were gone forever. Couldn't restore Mom's handwriting on those lost pages. Couldn't give me back the memories and notes that had been destroyed. Dad could see I was struggling and suggested we take the 3 damaged albums to a photo restoration specialist right away, using some of Linda's settlement money to pay for the best person we could find. We found a specialist across town who worked with historical photos and damaged documents, and she carefully opened the first album on her workspace, gently separating pages that had been stuck together with dried garbage juice for weeks. When she peeled apart a page from my 4th birthday, and Mom's handwriting appeared, still readable under the stains, I started crying harder than I had since the night I'd found them in the dumpster. The specialist was patient and kind, letting me cry while she worked, and she promised to treat the albums with the care they deserved, as the precious items they were to our family. The restoration specialist explained the whole process would take about 3 months because she had to work slowly to avoid causing more damage to the delicate pages. Some pages were too far gone to save completely, the ink too faded or the paper too deteriorated, but she thought she could preserve maybe 70% of what we'd recovered. She showed us examples of her previous work, damaged photos and documents she'd brought back from worse conditions than ours, and Dad wrote her a check from Linda's settlement money with this grim satisfaction on his face. Knowing that Linda's money was going directly toward fixing what she'd destroyed felt like a small piece of justice, even though it couldn't undo the permanent damage she'd caused. While Linda packed her stuff to move out over the next few weeks, I got a message on Instagram from someone named Chloe Williamson. She said her parents were Daryl and Dolores, and they'd told her what happened with my mom's albums, and she wanted to say she was sorry about what I'd been through. At first, I thought it was just a pity message, but Chloe kept talking to me and asking real questions about Mom and what the albums had meant to me. She didn't treat me like I was being dramatic about some old photos. She actually understood that I was grieving something irreplaceable that had been stolen from me. We started messaging every day and then hanging out at the school, and she became the first real friend I'd made since Linda moved in 2 years ago. Having someone my age who got it, who didn't think I was weird for still missing my mom or caring so much about photo albums, made everything feel a little less heavy. Linda's moving day happened on a Saturday morning 2 weeks later. Dad and I stayed upstairs in his room with the door closed, while her friends carried boxes down to the rental truck parked in the driveway. I could hear furniture scraping across floors and voices calling out directions about which boxes went where. Every thump and bang made me feel lighter, like someone was physically removing weight from my chest. Dad sat on his bed scrolling through his phone, but not really looking at anything, just needing something to do with his hands while we waited for this to be over. Around noon, I heard the front door close one final time, and then the truck engine starting up outside. I went to the window and watched the truck pull away down the street, Linda sitting in the passenger seat staring straight ahead without looking back at the house. Dad came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. We stood there watching until the truck turned the corner and disappeared. That afternoon, Dad called a locksmith who came out and changed every single lock on the house. New deadbolts on the front and back doors, new locks on the garage and the side gate, even new locks on the windows. Dad kept the old keys in a plastic bag and threw them in the outside trash can, and I watched him do it from the kitchen window. That night, we ordered 2 large pizzas and ate them in the living room while watching action movies on the couch, something we hadn't done since before Linda moved in, because she always complained about eating in the living room or watching violent movies. The house felt different already, quieter but in a good way, like it could finally relax and be itself again. Over the next few weeks, Dad and I started taking back all the spaces Linda had changed. We repainted my room a dark blue color I'd always wanted instead of the beige Linda had chosen. Dad let me pick out new bedding and curtains, and we spent a whole Saturday putting everything together while listening to Mom's old music collection that Dad had kept in the garage. The hardest part was finding a replacement for the butterfly bookshelf Mom had painted. We checked every thrift store and antique shop within 30 miles, but nothing looked right. Everything was either too modern or the wrong size, or just didn't feel like something Mom would have chosen. I was starting to think we'd never find anything close when Dad surprised me one afternoon by bringing home a plain wooden bookshelf from the furniture store. He said he'd found an artist who specialized in custom painting and had showed her photos of the original bookshelf that he'd taken years ago. 3 weeks later, Dad brought home the finished bookshelf, and I started crying the second I saw it. The artist had painted butterflies in the exact same style Mom had used, with my name written in the same curving letters across the top. It wasn't the original, and we both knew that, but it was close enough that I could put Mom's 3 restored albums on it and feel like I was honoring her memory the way she deserved. Around the same time, Chloe sent me a message asking if I wanted to hang out with her and some friends at the mall that weekend. I almost said no because I'd gotten used to spending all my free time alone in my room, but then I realized that's exactly what Linda had wanted. She'd made bringing friends home so uncomfortable with her comments and rules that I'd just stopped trying to have a social life. I met Chloe and 3 of her friends at the food court, and we spent the afternoon trying on ridiculous clothes at thrift stores and taking stupid photos in the arcade. They were nice and didn't ask too many questions about what had happened with Linda, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like a normal teenager instead of someone constantly walking on eggshells in their own house. We started hanging out regularly after that, and I realized how isolated I'd been without even noticing it happening. Having friends who just wanted to laugh and be silly without any drama or tension felt like coming up for air after being underwater too long. 3 months after the settlement was finalized, the restoration specialist called Dad's cell phone while we were eating breakfast. She said the albums were ready for pickup and we should come by her studio that afternoon. Dad and I barely touched our food after that, too nervous and excited to eat. We drove across town to her studio, and she led us to her workspace where the 3 albums were laid out on a clean white table. She'd managed to save about 70% of the content, with some pages looking almost perfect and others showing water stains and damage but still readable. Every single page was now protected in a clear plastic sleeve to prevent any more damage. She opened the first album to show us her work, and there was Mom's handwriting on a page from my 2nd birthday party, the ink slightly faded, but every word still clear. The photo showed me covered in chocolate cake with Mom laughing in the background. Her note said I'd insisted on eating the cake with my hands, even though she'd given me a fork. I touched the plastic sleeve covering the page and couldn't stop the tears from coming. That night, Dad and I sat together on the living room couch with all 3 restored albums spread out on the coffee table. We went through them slowly, reading every note Mom had written and looking at every photo she'd saved. There were pictures from my 3rd birthday party at the park where I'd fallen in the pond, and notes about our beach trip when I was 5, where I'd collected so many shells that Mom had to buy an extra suitcase to bring them home. We laughed at Mom's jokes about my weird food preferences and cried at her messages about how much she loved watching me grow up. Dad admitted something that surprised me. He said after he married Linda, he'd stopped looking at the albums because it felt wrong, like he was being disloyal to his new wife by spending time with memories of Mom. He realized now that's exactly what Linda had wanted, to slowly erase Mom from our lives until we forgot she'd ever been part of our family. Hearing Dad say that made me angry all over again, but it also helped me understand why he hadn't protected the albums better. He'd been trying so hard to make his new marriage work that he'd let Linda manipulate him into abandoning Mom's memory. A few weeks later, Dad suggested I start seeing the school counselor, Sebastian, for regular sessions to help process everything that had happened. At first, I didn't want to because I thought it meant Dad thought I was broken or damaged, but he explained that even though we'd won and gotten some justice, I was still dealing with a huge loss and betrayal. Sebastian turned out to be really helpful, not in a fake therapist way, but just as someone who listened and asked good questions. He helped me understand that being angry at Linda was completely valid and normal, but I also needed to work on forgiving Dad for his mistakes. That was the hard part, because part of me was still mad that Dad had let Linda into our lives in the first place, that he hadn't seen through her act sooner, that he hadn't protected something so precious. But Sebastian pointed out that Dad was genuinely trying to make things right now, that he'd chosen me over Linda when it mattered, and that holding on to anger at Dad would only hurt both of us. It took months of weekly sessions to get to a place where I could accept that Dad had failed me, but also that he was human and had been manipulated by someone who was really good at manipulation. 6 months after Linda moved out, Dad and I had developed all these new routines that made the house feel like home again. We cooked dinner together most nights, trying new recipes and laughing when they turned out terrible. We had a rotation of TV shows we watched together, and Dad started asking my opinion on things instead of just making decisions for both of us. We had inside jokes again, something we hadn't had since before Mom died. Chloe came over regularly, and Dad treated her like she was already part of the family, always making sure we had snacks and giving us space to just be teenagers. He told me once that he was grateful I had friends like Chloe, who'd stuck by me through everything, who understood that some days were harder than others, and I might need to cancel plans because I was having a rough time missing Mom. On what would have been Mom's 45th birthday, Dad and I spent the morning looking through all 3 restored albums together. We read every note and looked at every photo, sharing memories and telling each other stories about Mom that the other person might not know. In the afternoon, we went to the garden center and bought butterfly bushes, purple coneflowers, and black-eyed Susans. We spent the rest of the day digging up Linda's modern landscaping in the backyard and planting a butterfly garden in its place. It wouldn't look like much until next spring when everything bloomed, but we both knew Mom would have loved it. As we worked, I thought about the 14 albums that were gone forever. All those photos and notes and memories that Linda had destroyed and we'd never get back. Our family would never be what it was when Mom was alive, and there would always be this hole where those lost albums should be. But we'd protected her memory from someone who tried to erase it completely, and we'd made sure Linda faced real consequences for what she'd done. That felt like honoring Mom in the way she deserved, by refusing to let her be forgotten or erased, by fighting for the precious gift she'd left behind, even when most of it was already lost.